Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight we're diving into the darkest, most haunting theories about Stranger Things Season 5. I think if you're more of a casual fan or just really loved the show and want to speculate about what's coming, there's a lot of interesting theories to explore. And I'll be covering all the theories I can fit in for tonight, from character deaths to the true nature of the Upside Down, time loops, ancient curses, and the clues the Duffer Brothers have been leaving since day one. There's definitely more Stranger Things content to come in future videos, so we'll start with the biggest question, what the Upside Down actually is and how it connects to everything. Then we'll move on to the theories about who's going to survive Season 5 and who probably won't make it out of Hawkins alive. We'll talk about Vecna's master plan, the Mind Flayer's true nature, and whether time itself is broken in Hawkins. Plenty to theorize about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, grab your flashlight and Eggo waffles, get cozy in your blanket fort, and let's begin. So way before we can understand what's going to happen in Season 5, we need to talk about the biggest question that's haunted the series from the very beginning. What actually is the Upside Down? This sounds like a simple question, but the answer is way more complicated than you'd think, and depending on which theory you believe, it completely changes what we should expect from the final season. The Upside Down has been the source of basically every threat in Stranger Things. The Demogorgon came from there, the Mind Flayer lives there, Will was trapped there, and Vecna has been ruling it like some kind of twisted dimension lord. But what is it really? There are a few major theories floating around, and honestly, each one is pretty compelling in its own way. Theory 1 is probably the most straightforward. 11 created the Upside Down when she touched the Demogorgon in 1983. If you remember that scene from Season 1, 11 is in the sensory deprivation tank at Hawkins' lab, and she's using her powers to spy on the Russian guy. But then she encounters this creature, this thing that shouldn't exist, and when she touches it in the void, she accidentally tears open a gate between dimensions. The theory goes that her powers were so strong, and the moment was so traumatic that she didn't just open a door. She literally created the Upside Down itself as a dark mirror of Hawkins. The evidence for this is pretty strong. Before that moment, there's no mention of the Upside Down existing, and the fact that it's specifically a twisted version of Hawkins, not just some random hell dimension, suggests 11's mind shaped it somehow. Like her subconscious created this nightmare version of her world. But then Season 4 came along and really complicated things, because we find out that Henry Creel, also known as One, also known as Vecna, was banished to the Upside Down by 11 years before the Demogorgon incident. This was back in 1979, when 11 was just a little kid at the lab. She fought One, overpowered him, and blasted him into another dimension. So if Vecna was already in the Upside Down in 1979, then 11 couldn't have created it in 1983. Which brings us to Theory 2. The Upside Down already existed as some kind of parallel dimension, and 11 just opened a gate to it. Maybe it's always been there, existing alongside our world, waiting for someone powerful enough to punch through the barrier. This makes sense from a physics standpoint, if you want to call anything about this show physics. Parallel dimensions are a thing in theoretical science, kind of. And maybe the Upside Down is just one of many alternate realities, and Hawkins happens to sit on a thin spot where the barriers between worlds are weaker. Theory 3 gets even more interesting. Some people think the Upside Down is a parallel dimension that did exist naturally, but it was corrupted by something. Maybe it started as a normal mirror world, but then something infected it, turned it dark and hostile, and that something could be the Mind Flayer, or it could be whatever the Mind Flayer answers to, if it even answers to anything. The fact that the Upside Down looks like Hawkins but wrong suggests it's mimicking our world rather than being its own independent place. And that mimicry, that parasitic quality, feels intentional, like the dimension itself is trying to replace our world, or merge with it, or consume it entirely. And then there's theory 4, which is proper mental. What if the upside down isn't a parallel dimension at all? What if it's Hawkins' future? There's this huge piece of evidence that supports this idea, and it's something Nancy discovers in season 4. When she's trapped in the upside down, she realizes that everything is frozen on November 6th, 1983. That's the day Will Byers disappeared. The upside down version of her room still has her season 1 era decorations. Nothing has changed since that specific date. So the question becomes, why that day? If the upside down is just a mirror dimension, why would it be stuck in time? But if it's actually Hawkins' future, a timeline where the gate opening caused some kind of temporal catastrophe, then being frozen on that date starts to make sense. Maybe opening the gate didn't just create a spatial rift. Maybe it created a temporal one. And the upside down is what Hawkins becomes when the timelines get tangled up. This would explain why it looks like Hawkins, but decayed. It is Hawkins, just decades or centuries in the future, after the upside-down infection has completely taken over. Before looking into all this, I honestly hadn't realised how important that November 6th detail was. I just thought it was a creepy bit of atmosphere, the place being stuck in the past. But the more you think about it, the weirder it gets. Because if the upside down is truly frozen in time, then someone or something froze it. It didn't just stop on its own. And the most likely candidate for having that kind of reality-altering power is either Eleven or Vecna, or possibly both of them working in tandem without realizing it. Let's talk about Will's connection for a second, because it's absolutely critical to understanding the Upside Down's nature. Will was the first person taken in season 1. Not killed, taken. The Demogorgon grabbed him and dragged him into the Upside Down, and Will survived there for a week. A week. Most people who encounter upside-down creatures die immediately. Barb was killed within hours, but Will hid, used his knowledge of Hawkins to navigate the Dark Mirror version, and somehow stayed alive, long enough to be rescued. And then in season 2 we find out he's still connected to the place. He has these episodes, these now memories, where he can sense what's happening in the Upside Down. The Mind Flayer possessed him, used him as a spy. Even after being exorcised, Will can still feel when the Mind Flayer is close. He tells everyone in season 3 that the Mind Flayer is back because the hairs on his neck stand up. In season 4, he admits he can still sense Vecna. So why Will? That's the question nobody's really answered satisfactorily. Was he just unlucky, wrong place, wrong time? Or was there something about him specifically that made him valuable to the Upside Down? Some fans think Will has latent powers, that he's connected to the Upside Down on a fundamental level, possibly even before he was taken. Others think the Demogorgon chose him because it could sense he'd be compatible with the hive mind, that his mind was open or sensitive in a way that made him perfect for possession. There's also the theory that Will was specifically targeted because of his connection to Eleven. They didn't know each other in season 1, but they're connected through the story, through Joyce and Hopper, through the party. Maybe the Upside Down needed Will to draw Eleven out, to force her to use her powers and keep the gate open. And here's where it gets really dark. What if Will was always meant to be the bridge, not just between our world and the Upside Down, but between Eleven and Vecna? He's connected to both of them now. Eleven saved him. Vecna tormented him. If season 5 is about closing the Upside Down permanently, Will might be the key, and that brings up the sacrifice theory, which we'll get to later. Now there's one more person we need to talk about when discussing the Upside Down's origin. Henry Creel, Victor Creel's son, the boy who became one, who became Vecna. His story completely rewrites what we thought we knew about the timeline. Henry was killing people with his mind back in 1959. He murdered his mother and sister, framed his father, and got away with it. Then he was found by Dr. Brenner and brought to the lab where he became Subject 1, the first child with powers. He worked at the lab for years, apparently helping Brenner with the other kids, but really he was manipulating things from the inside. And when Eleven was strong enough, he tried to get her to escape with him. to burn the lab down and kill everyone. She refused, they fought, and 11 discovered depths of power she didn't know she had. She overpowered one and essentially blasted him out of existence, except she didn't kill him, she sent him somewhere, and that somewhere was the Upside Down. According to Vecna's own story, in Season 4, when 11 banished him, he fell through dimensions and landed in the Upside Down. And here's where his version of events gets really interesting. He says that when he arrived, the Upside Down was basically shapeless. It had the particles, the atmosphere, but it didn't have structure. And Vecna claims that he shaped it. He used his powers to give the dimension form, to create the twisted mirror of Hawkins that we know. He specifically says he found the Mind Flayer as a shapeless storm of particles and gave it the spider shape we see. He moulded the Upside Down into his own image, turning it into a weapon he could use against the world that rejected him. But here's the thing, can we actually trust anything Vecna says? The man is a serial killer who tortured and murdered children. He's not exactly a reliable narrator. It's entirely possible he's taking credit for things he didn't do, or that he's misremembering, or that he genuinely believes he shaped the Upside Down, when really he was just another pawn in something much bigger. The Mind Flayer could have already been there, fully formed, and it just let Vecna think he was in control. That would be very much in line with how the Mind Flayer operates. It's a master manipulator. It possessed will, it created the flayed, it built an entire meat monster out of liquefied people. Why wouldn't it manipulate Vecna too? There's also the question of what the Upside Down was doing between 1979, when Vecna arrived, and 1983, when 11 opened the gate. That's 4 years where presumably Vecna was in there, ruling his dark dimension, and yet nothing happened. No monsters escaped, no gates opened, the Upside Down was sealed off completely. And then suddenly in 1983, 11 touches the Demogorgon and everything changes. Was Vecna waiting for that moment? Did he send the Demogorgon to find 11 specifically, knowing she'd open a gate when she tried to spy on it? Or was the Demogorgon acting independently, and Vecna just took advantage of the gate opening? I honestly think there's something deeper going on here. The timeline is too convenient. The fact that 11 banished Vecna in 1979 and then opened the gate in 1983 and the Upside Down is frozen on the exact day the gate opened, all of this feels planned. Not by any individual character, but by the Upside Down itself. What if the dimension is intelligent? Not just the Mind Flayer, but the whole place. What if it's been orchestrating events from the beginning, using Vecna and 11 as tools to accomplish its goal of merging with our world? Fun fact that a lot of people missed is that there are actually references to strange occurrences. In Hawkins before 1983, Victor Creel's house was known to be cursed. People avoided it. There were rumours about weird things happening in the woods near the lab. Will's friends talked about the Demogorgon in their Dungeons and Dragons games before they ever encountered a real one. It's like Hawkins has always been connected to something dark, and the gate opening in 1983 wasn't the beginning of the story. It was just the moment when everything that had been building beneath the surface finally broke through. So obviously, there are loads of theories about what the Upside Down actually is, and none of them are mutually exclusive. It could be a parallel dimension that's also a corrupted future that Vecna also shaped. The Duffer Brothers love layering mysteries, and I wouldn't be surprised if the answer is more complicated than any single theory. But whatever the truth is, one thing's pretty clear. The Upside Down wants something. It's not just sitting there passively, it's actively trying to merge with our world, to consume Hawkins, to spread. And that means Season 5 is going to be about stopping that merger before it's too late. Whether that requires closing the gates, destroying Vecna, defeating the Mind Flayer, or some combination of all three, we'll have to wait and see. But talking a bit about the actual implications of this, if the Upside Down is truly frozen on November 6, 1983, then time works differently there, which means anyone who spent significant time in the Upside Down might be affected by temporal weirdness. Will was in there for a week our time, but how long was it for him? Max is currently in a coma after Vecna nearly killed her, and 11 brought her back, but her consciousness is somewhere else. Could she be experiencing time differently? Could she be trapped in the Upside Down mentally while her body heals in Hawkins? These are questions Season 5 needs to answer. And if the gate that opened in 1983 is the reason the Upside Down is frozen on that date, then closing the gates might unfreeze time there, which could be catastrophic. Imagine if decades or centuries of Upside Down time suddenly catch up all at once. Everything that's been building and growing and spreading in there would accelerate instantly. The dimension would age, evolve, potentially become even more dangerous. Or maybe unfreezing time is exactly what needs to happen to destroy the Upside Down. Maybe it's frozen specifically to preserve itself, and letting time flow again would cause it to decay and collapse. I don't know. The time aspect of this is properly mental, and I'll admit I'm not entirely sure how it all fits together. But the Duffer Brothers clearly put that November 6th detail in there for a reason. It's too specific to be just flavour. It means something, and whatever it means, it's going to be central to how Season 5 resolves. But character deaths, as devastating as they'll be, are where most people's minds go when they think about the final season. Because the Duffer Brothers have been pretty clear that not everyone's making it out alive. And the question isn't if someone dies, it's who and how, and whether their death actually means something. So let's talk about the thing everyone's both dreading and obsessively theorising about. Who's not making it out of Hawkins alive? Let's start with Will Byers, because if anyone's earned a happy ending, it's him. Will has been through absolute hell since episode 1 of season 1. He was kidnapped by the Demogorgon, trapped in the Upside Down for a week, rescued but traumatised, possessed by the Mind Flayer in season 2, used as a spy, exercised in a horrifically painful way, struggled with his identity and his connection to the Upside Down in season 3, moved away from Hawkins and lost his friends. And then in season 4 he's basically sidelined while everyone else has massive character moments. The poor guy has been suffering for 4 seasons straight. So obviously the theory is that he's going to die in season 5, probably sacrificing himself to close the Upside Down permanently. Because that's how these stories work, right? The character who suffered most gets a heroic death. The evidence for Will's sacrifice is pretty compelling. First, there's his deep connection to the Upside Down that we've already discussed. He's been linked to that dimension since the beginning. If anyone understands the Upside Down, if anyone could theoretically close it from the inside or serve as a bridge to destroy it, it's Will. He's been possessed by the Mind Flayer. He knows what it feels like to be part of that hive mind. That knowledge could be crucial. Second, there's the narrative parallel to Lord of the Rings, which the Duffer Brothers have explicitly said is a major influence on Stranger Things. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo carries the ring to Mount Doom and destroys it. But he's forever changed by the experience. He can never go back to his old life. He has to leave the Shire and sail to the Undying Lands. The quest saves the world, but it costs Frodo everything. Will is very much the Frodo of Stranger Things. He's the one who bore the burden, who carried the darkness inside him, and the theory is that he'll have a similar ending. Either he dies destroying the Upside Down, or he survives but can never truly escape it. Maybe he has to stay in the Upside Down to keep it sealed. Maybe he becomes the new guardian of the gate, ensuring it never opens again. Now, I really hope this theory is wrong. I genuinely think Will deserves better. He's been through enough. Killing him or trapping him in an eternal sacrifice would be heartbreaking, but it would also be very much in line with the bittersweet ending the Duffer Brothers have promised. They've said season 5 won't be a pure, happy ending. There will be losses, there will be consequences, and Will is unfortunately the most obvious candidate for that kind of tragic resolution. There's also the question of Will's sexuality, which the show has been dancing around since season 1. It's pretty clear at this point that Will is gay and has feelings for Mike, even though he's never explicitly said it. Killing your gay character right after finally acknowledging his queerness would be a terrible look, a falling directly into the bury your gays trope that's plagued media for decades. The Duffer Brothers know this. They're not idiots. So either they're going to let Will live and give him a proper coming out arc in season 5, or they're going to kill him in a way that's so heroic and meaningful that it transcends the trope. I'm hoping for the former, but I'm worried about the latter. And here's another angle to consider. Will is an artist. He draws constantly. In season 2, his drawings of the Mind Flayer were crucial to understanding what they were facing. In season 4, his painting for Mike is this beautiful, heartfelt gesture that shows how much he cares about his friends and how deeply he feels things. What if his art becomes the key to defeating the Upside Down? Not his death, but his creativity. His ability to imagine, to create, to bring beauty into the darkness. That would be a much more satisfying ending than just killing him off. Let Will's sensitivity, the thing that made him a target, be the thing that saves everyone. Let his art literally reshape reality, countering Vecna's corruption with something pure. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. The Duffer Brothers are masters of misdirection. Maybe all this Will sacrifice theorizing is exactly what they want us to think, and he'll survive while someone else takes the fall. Which brings us to Steve Harrington. Oh, Steve, everyone's favourite babysitter, the character who's had the best redemption arc in the entire show. He started as the stereotypical douchebag boyfriend in season 1, and he's become this protective, caring, genuinely good person who would die for these kids without hesitation. And that's exactly why loads of people think he's going to die in season 5. His arc is complete. He went from selfish to selfless. He found his purpose. He dreamed of having a family, 6 little nuggets, in a Winnebago driving around the country. And in stories like this, when a character has completed their arc and voiced their dream future, they die before they can achieve it. It's tragic storytelling 101. Season 4 really hammered this home. Steve nearly died so many times. He got dragged into the Upside Down by those tentacle vines. He got mauled by demo bats. He almost drowned. He made it through all of that, but just barely. And there's this sense throughout season 4 that Steve is living on borrowed time. Every near-death experience felt like foreshadowing, like the show was preparing us for the inevitable. Then there's the whole Nancy situation. Steve still has feelings for Nancy, that's obvious. And Nancy is torn between Steve and Jonathan, even though she won't admit it. The love triangle is still hanging there, unresolved, and one way to resolve it cleanly, without making Nancy choose, is to kill Steve. He dies heroically, saves everyone, and Nancy doesn't have to break anyone's heart. It's narratively convenient, which is exactly why it feels likely. There's also a parallel to Bob Newby, Joyce's boyfriend in season 2. Bob was this sweet, dorky, genuinely good guy who loved Joyce and treated her kids well. And the show built him up, made you love him, and then killed him off in one of the most heartbreaking deaths in the series. He died saving everyone from the lab, and his death had real weight because we cared about him. Steve is basically a more developed version of Bob. He's the good guy, the protector, the one who would absolutely throw himself in front of a monster to save the kids. And that heroic impulse is going to get him killed. Peak Stranger Things logic? Give us a character to love, show us his dreams, make him impossibly heroic, and then rip him away. No notes. To be honest, I'd actually be proper devastated if this happens. Steve is one of the best parts of the show. Joe Keery's performance is fantastic, and the character has earned a happy ending. Let him get his Winnebago. Let him find someone who appreciates him. Let him be the cool uncle to the party kids as they grow up. Killing Steve would be emotionally effective, sure, but it would also feel like punishing a character for being good. And I don't know if that's the message the show wants to send. But then again, this is Stranger Things. Nobody's safe. The show has killed kids, Teenagers, adults, beloved side characters. It's not afraid to go dark. And Steve volunteering to be the sacrifice, insisting on being the one to go into danger because he can't let the kids do it. That's completely in character. He'd make that choice without hesitation. And that's what makes it so tragic. Now let's talk about Max, because her situation is probably the most complicated and disturbing of all the theories. At the end of season 4, Vecna kills Max, or nearly kills her. She dies in Lucas's arms, her bones are broken, her eyes are gone, and 11 arrives too late to stop it. But then 11 goes into Max's mind and somehow pulls her back. Max's heart starts beating again. She's alive, but when she wakes up, she's not responsive. She's in a coma, blind, and according to 11, her mind is blank, empty. There's no consciousness there, no Max. So the theory is that Max isn't really alive, not in any meaningful sense. Her body is alive, breathing, functioning, but her consciousness, her soul, whatever you want to call it, is gone. And the question is, where did it go? The most popular theory is that Max's consciousness is trapped in Vecna's mindscape, the same place where he shows his victims their trauma and kills them. When Vecna dies, his victims usually die with him. But Max technically died and came back. So maybe her consciousness is stuck in that in-between place, neither fully dead nor fully alive, a ghost in Vecna's machine. This would mean that Max is experiencing the upside down mentally, while her body is in a coma in Hawkins. She's trapped in that nightmare dimension, possibly reliving her worst memories over and over, possibly being tortured by Vecna or the Mind Flayer, and she can't wake up, she can't escape. And the only way to save her is to go into the upside down, find wherever Vecna is keeping her consciousness prisoner, and bring her back. Which sounds impossible, but this is Stranger Things. Impossible is kind of the whole point. What's really interesting is that Sadie Sink, the actress who plays Max, has said in interviews that season 5 is going to be really intense for Max, which implies she has a significant role, not just lying in a coma for the whole season. So either Max wakes up early on, or her consciousness is active in the upside down, and we see her story play out there. Maybe she's been trapped in that mindscape for weeks or months from her perspective, and she's learned things about Vecna and the upside down that nobody else knows. Maybe she's become a kind of spy, gathering information from the inside. Or maybe she's fighting for her life in there, trying to stay sane, trying to hold on to herself, while Vecna tries to break her. There's also the question of her blindness and broken bones. If Max does wake up, she's going to be dealing with serious disabilities. She won't be able to see, she might not be able to walk, and the show needs to handle that with care and respect. Max has always been this tough, independent character who refuses to be a victim, dealing with permanent injuries, while also dealing with the trauma of what Vecna did to her. That's a massive character arc, and it could be incredibly powerful if done right. The darker version of this theory is that Max is already dead, properly dead, and what's in the hospital bed is just an empty shell that 11 is keeping animated because she can't accept that she failed to save Max. That would be absolutely devastating, and it would mean that Max's death has already happened. We just haven't accepted it yet. I really hope that's not the case. I want Max to come back, to wake up, to have a chance to heal and recover and get her happy ending with Lucas. But this is Stranger Things. Happy endings aren't guaranteed, which brings us to 11 herself. The character the entire show revolves around. The girl with the power to move things with her mind, to open gates to other dimensions, to bring people back from death. 11 is the most powerful person in the series, and she's also the most tragic. She's been experimented on, abused, used as a weapon, forced to fight battles that aren't hers, and she's never had a normal childhood. And there are two major theories about her fate in season 5. Theory 1 is that 11 loses her powers permanently. Throughout the series, Elle has lost her powers and regained them multiple times. She loses them at the end of season 3 after closing the gate and fighting the Mind Flayer. She spends all of season 4 trying to get them back, going through Brenna's brutal training program, reliving her trauma, and eventually restoring her abilities. But what if season 5 is about her losing them for good? Not because she's weak or because she fails, but because she chooses to give them up. Maybe defeating Vecna and closing the Upside Down requires Elle to sacrifice her powers permanently. Maybe her connection to the Upside Down, the same connection that makes her powerful, is also what's keeping the gates open. And the only way to seal them forever is for her to sever that connection, which means losing her abilities. This would actually be a pretty satisfying ending for Eleven's character arc. Her whole story has been about wanting to be normal, wanting to have friends and a family, and a regular life. Mike tells her she's not a monster. She's a superhero, but Elle has never wanted to be a superhero. She just wants to be a regular girl. Losing her powers would let her have that. She could go to school, graduate, have a future that doesn't involve fighting interdimensional monsters. She could just be Jane Hopper, not 11 the lab experiment. And that would be beautiful. But theory 2 is much darker. 11 sacrifices herself to close the Upside Down. She dies saving everyone. And this theory has a lot of narrative weight behind it. 11 opened the first gate. She's the one who connected our world to the Upside Down, even if it was an accident. So maybe she's the only one who can close it permanently. Maybe her death is the price. She has to give up her life to undo what she started. It's tragic, it's heroic, and it completes the circle. The girl who opened the door is the one who closes it. I love that the show has consistently positioned 11 as someone who deserves a normal life, who's earned her happy ending. She saved the world multiple times over. She suffered more than anyone. If there's any character who should get to survive and be happy, it's her. But at the same time, this is the final season. The Duffer Brothers have promised real consequences, and 11 is the main character. Her death would have the most impact. It would hurt the most, which is exactly why it might happen. There's also the question of what Papa told her. Brenner, before he died, kept saying that 11 was the only one who could save everyone, that she had to be strong enough, that her destiny was to fight this battle. And Brenner has never been wrong about 11's importance, even if his methods were monstrous. So, maybe he knew that her ultimate purpose was to sacrifice herself. Maybe that's what he was preparing her for all along. Honestly, I think the most likely scenario is something in between. 11 survives, but she loses her powers. She gets to live, but she's no longer special. She's just a girl, and she has to learn how to be okay with that, how to find her identity outside of her abilities. That feels like the kind of bittersweet ending that would work. Elle gets her normal life, but it costs her the thing that made her powerful. Is that a happy ending or a sad one? I guess it depends on how you look at it. Now let's talk about Joyce and Hopper, because if the show kills one or both of them, I will riot. Joyce and Hopper have been through hell to get to where they are. Joyce lost Bob. Hopper lost Sarah and then supposedly died in season 3, only to be revealed as alive and imprisoned in a Russian gulag. They've both been separated from their kids, traumatized, pushed to their absolute limits, and at the end of season 4, they finally get to be together. They finally have a chance at happiness. If the Duffer Brothers take that away, it will be genuinely cruel. But the theory exists because it makes narrative sense. Parental sacrifice is a powerful trope. Joyce and Hopper are parents. Their entire motivation is protecting their kids. Will and Elle and Jonathan. So if it comes down to a choice between their lives and their children's lives, they choose their kids without hesitation. One or both of them dying to save their family would be emotionally devastating, but thematically appropriate. It would complete their arcs as protectors. Hopper especially feels vulnerable. He's already died once, or we thought he did. His death fake out in season 3 was one of the most emotional moments in the series. Bringing him back was a gift, and narratively, you can only cheat death so many times before it catches up to you. Hopper surviving the explosion, surviving the Russian prison, surviving the Demogorgon fight, surviving everything in Season 4. At some point his luck has to run out. And him dying for real in Season 5, making an actual final sacrifice, would hit incredibly hard because we thought we already lost him once. Joyce, on the other hand, has already lost so much. Bob died saving her and her kids. Her marriage to Lonnie was a disaster. She's been a single mum fighting to keep her family together against impossible odds. Killing Joyce would be gutting, but it would also make a kind of horrible sense. The show has put Joyce through hell. Maybe the final tragedy is that she doesn't get to see her sons grow up. She saves them, but she doesn't survive to enjoy the peace that follows. I really, really hope neither of them dies. Joyce and Hopper deserve their happy ending. They've earned it. Let them get married. Let them be a family. Let them have some peace. But this is the final season of a show that's never been afraid to hurt its characters. So I'm not holding my breath. Then there's Mike Wheeler, and this theory is the one that would shock people most. Mike is basically the main character of the kids' storyline. He's the heart of the party. He's Eleven's boyfriend. He's Will's best friend. He's Nancy's little brother. He's connected to everyone, and killing him would send shockwaves through the entire cast. Every single character would be affected. Elle would be devastated. Will would be destroyed. Nancy would lose her brother. The party would be broken. It would be the most emotionally destructive death possible. And that's exactly why some people think it might happen. Because it would hurt the most. Mike has been less central in recent seasons. Season 3 and 4 gave him less to do, less character development. He's been sort of coasting, which could be the writers setting him up for a shocking exit. Kill the character nobody expects to die. The one who feels safest, the leader. That would be a proper gut punch. There's also a parallel to Season 1. The whole first season was about finding Will, saving Will, bringing him back from the upside down. It was Mike's desperate mission to save his best friend. What if Season 5 reverses that? What if Mike is the one who gets taken or killed, and Will has to be the one who saves him or avenges him? It would complete the circle of their friendship. It would give Will a hero moment, and it would be absolutely tragic. But I think this theory is probably wrong. Mike is too important to the show's structure. He's the audience surrogate in a lot of ways, the normal kid in the group who has to deal with all the supernatural insanity. Killing him would fundamentally change what Stranger Things is. And while I could see the Duffer Brothers doing it for shock value, I don't think they'd do it for narrative value. Mike's death wouldn't serve the story the way Steve's death would, or Will's sacrifice would. It would just be cruel. Now, quick note about Eddie Munson, because loads of people are hoping he comes back somehow. Eddie died at the end of Season 4, sacrificing himself to give the others time to fight Vecna. And his death was heroic and tragic and beautifully done. But he's dead, properly dead. There's no ambiguity about it. However, that doesn't mean we won't see him in Season 5. Flashbacks are a thing. And given how popular Eddie became, it would make sense for the show to include him in some capacity. Maybe Dustin has visions of him. Maybe there's a scene where we see Eddie's impact on the town, his legacy. Maybe his uncle plays a bigger role. Joseph Quinn, the actor, has been pretty cryptic about whether he's in Season 5, which suggests there might be something, but Eddie's not coming back to life. That would cheapen his sacrifice. As for the rest of the characters, Jonathan, Nancy, Robin, Dustin, Lucas, Erica, they're all theoretically in danger. But realistically, most of them are probably safe. Jonathan and Nancy need to resolve their relationship. Robin's just getting started on her character arc. Dustin is too beloved to kill. Lucas has suffered enough with Max. Erica is basically invincible. I could see one of them dying, maybe Jonathan since he's been kind of sidelined. But I don't think the show will kill more than 2 or 3 major characters total. You need people left standing at the end to carry the emotional weight of what happened. The thing about character deaths in the final season is that they have to mean something. They can't just be for shock value. Every death needs to serve the story, to complete an arc, to make the victory feel earned. And the Duffer Brothers are good at that. Bob's death mattered. Billy's death mattered. Eddie's death mattered. So whoever dies in season 5, it's going to hurt, but it's going to feel right. At least I hope so. But obviously, character deaths are only part of the final season story. Because the real question isn't just who survives. It's whether they can actually defeat the evil that's been building since day one. And speaking of that evil, we need to talk about what Vecna's actual endgame might be. So Vecna opened 4 gates at the end of season 4, creating this massive rift in Hawkins. But loads of people have been theorizing that this wasn't his final goal. It was just step 1. The 4 gates converged in the center of town, splitting Hawkins in half essentially, and almost immediately the Upside Down started bleeding through. The sky turned red, spores and particles started floating everywhere. Dead vines and corruption spread across the ground, and Upside Down creatures, demogorgons and demobats, started pouring into Hawkins proper. It's the beginning of the end. But what's the actual end? What is Vecna trying to accomplish beyond just revenge on 11 and destruction of Hawkins? Theory 1 is that the 4 gates are opening something bigger, not just connecting our world to the Upside Down, but creating a permanent merger. Imagine the 2 dimensions overlapping completely. Not just gates you can walk through, but the Upside Down and our world becoming the same place. No barriers, no separation, and if that happens, the Upside Down's corruption would spread everywhere. Not just Hawkins, the entire world. The red sky, the particles, the monsters, all of it spreading across the globe until there's no safe place left. Vecna gets his wish. He reshapes the world in his image, a dark, twisted hellscape where he rules supreme. The evidence for this is pretty strong. Vecna's whole speech to 11 in season 4 is about how he wants to cleanse the world, to reshape it, to become a kind of god overseeing a new order. He's not just angry at 11 or at Hawkins. He hates humanity. He thinks people are corrupt and deserve to be wiped out. So creating a world where only the strong survive, where the Upside Down's hive mind dominates, that aligns with his philosophy. He's not trying to conquer the world in a traditional sense. He's trying to replace it with something he considers better. And then there's the question of why Hawkins specifically. This is something the show has never fully explained. Okay, so Hawkins' lab was there, and that's where 11 opened the first gate. But why was the lab in Hawkins in the first place? Small towns in Indiana aren't exactly prime locations for secret government facilities, unless there was a reason, unless there was something special about that location that drew the government there. Something beneath the town, something old. There's this theory that Hawkins sits on top of a convergence point, a place where the barriers between dimensions are naturally thin, like a supernatural hotspot, and that's why the lab was built there. The scientists weren't just studying psychic kids, they were studying the location itself, trying to understand why weird things happen there. The Creel murders in 1959, the unexplained phenomena, the local legends, all of it pointed to Hawkins being a place where the normal rules didn't apply. And if Hawkins is a convergence point, then opening gates there would be particularly effective. The dimensional barriers are already weak. Breaking them completely would be easier. And once Hawkins falls, the corruption could spread outward from there like a virus. The Creel house is central to this theory. Victor Creel's family was killed there in 1959, but it wasn't a random murder. It was Henry Creel, using his powers, killing his mother and sister, and the house has been cursed ever since. Nobody will live there. It's been abandoned for decades. But why that house? Was Henry drawn to it because of some property of the location? Was the house itself built on something significant? And Vecna's lair in the Upside Down is in the Creel house. That's where he operates from. He chose that specific location. It matters. Then there's Vecna's whole spiel about how he's been planning this for years. He didn't just get thrown into the Upside Down and immediately start plotting revenge. He spent time there, years, shaping the dimension, building his power, preparing. He learned how the Upside Down works, how the Mind Flayer operates, how to control creatures and manipulate reality. And the 4 gates weren't improvised. He needed 4 specific kills in 4 specific locations to create the pattern he wanted. It was a ritual, a sacrifice. And now that the ritual is complete, phase 2 begins. What's really interesting is that Vecna kept talking about how he was going to show Eleven the truth, that she'd see the world the way he sees it. And that implies he's planning something that will force her to confront his worldview. Maybe he's not just trying to kill everyone. Maybe he's trying to prove a point, to demonstrate that humanity is corrupt and deserves to be replaced. That would be very much in line with his God complex. He wants validation. He wants Eleven to admit he was right. But here's where things get complicated. Is Vecna actually in control? Or is he being manipulated by something bigger? Because everything he claims to have done, shaping the Upside Down, controlling the Mind Flayer, orchestrating the gate openings, all of that requires an incredible amount of power and knowledge. And yes, he's powerful, but is he that powerful? Could one person, even one incredibly gifted psychic person, really reshape an entire dimension? Or did the dimension let him think he was in charge while it used him to achieve its own goals? The spores spreading through Hawkins at the end of Season 4 are a big clue. Those aren't just atmospheric, they're infectious. In Season 2, we'll describe the Mind Flayer's particles as spreading through the Upside Down like a disease. And now they're spreading through Hawkins. Soon everyone in town will be breathing them in, touching them, getting exposed. And once the particles are inside you, the Mind Flayer can influence you, possess you, turn you into part of the hive mind. So even if Vecna dies, if those particles remain, the Upside Down can keep spreading. The infection continues. I honestly think there's something deeper going on here. Vecna is powerful, sure, but he's also arrogant, and arrogance makes you blind to manipulation. If the Mind Flayer or some other entity in the Upside Down has been using him this whole time, letting him believe he's in control, then killing Vecna won't solve the problem. The real enemy would still be out there. And that brings us to the question of what the Mind Flayer actually is, and whether it's independent from Vecna. Let's talk about the shadow monster, the Mind Flayer, the thing that terrorized Hawkins for 3 seasons before Vecna was even revealed. In Season 2, it was this massive entity in the Upside Down, this impossible storm cloud shaped vaguely like a spider, and it possessed will. In Season 3, it built an army of flayed humans and created that meat monster, the thing made out of melted and reformed people. It was the big bad, the ultimate threat. And then Season 4 happens, and we find out that actually, Vecna claims he shaped the Mind Flayer, that it was just a formless mass of particles before he gave it structure and purpose, that he's been controlling it this whole time. But here's the thing, I'm not entirely convinced Vecna was telling the truth. Or maybe he believes what he's saying, but he's wrong, because the Mind Flayer's behaviour doesn't really match up with someone who's being controlled. In Season 2, it felt like an independent entity. It had its own goals, its own intelligence. It wasn't just following orders, it was strategic. It used will to spy on our heroes. It built a network through the Upside Down to spread its influence. And when it possessed will, it felt like the Mind Flayer was the one in charge, not some puppet being manipulated by Vecna from afar. Season 3 is even more damning. The Mind Flayer built that meat monster, the thing in Starcourt Mall, and it nearly killed everyone. It took the combined efforts of Eleven, Hopper, Joyce and the kids to stop it. And during all of that, there was no indication that Vecna was involved. No connection to him. He wasn't mentioned. He wasn't hinted at. The Mind Flayer felt like its own threat. So either the Duffer brothers retconned the Mind Flayer's nature in Season 4, or Vecna is lying, or Vecna is mistaken about who's really in control. Fun fact that a lot of people missed is that the Mind Flayer's design is based on a spider, specifically a black widow. And spiders are predators. They build webs, they trap prey, they wait patiently. That's not the behaviour of something that's being controlled. That's the behaviour of something that's hunting. The Mind Flayer builds a web across Hawkins using the tunnels in Season 2. It builds a web of flayed humans in Season 3. And it's been waiting in the Upside Down, probably since long before Vecna arrived. So what if Vecna showing up in 1979 was just another fly landing in the spider's web? What if the Mind Flayer has been using Vecna the whole time, and he's too arrogant to realise it? There's also the hive mind concept. The Mind Flayer operates through a hive mind. Every creature in the Upside Down is connected to it. The Demogorgons, the Demobats, the Vines, all of it is part of one unified consciousness. And when Will was possessed, he became part of that hive mind too. He could sense what the Mind Flayer was thinking, what it wanted. He described it as this constant presence, this overwhelming intelligence that wanted to spread and consume. And that hive mind intelligence doesn't feel like Vecna. Vecna is an individual. He has an ego. He wants recognition, validation, power for himself. But the Mind Flayer doesn't seem to have an ego. It just wants to spread, to grow, to consume everything. That's not the goal of someone with Vecna's personality. That's the goal of something alien, something fundamentally different from human consciousness. Another thing to consider is that Vecna targets individuals. He chooses victims based on their trauma and guilt. He crafts personalized nightmares for them. He kills them one by one in this very intimate, psychological way. But the Mind Flayer doesn't do that. The Mind Flayer spreads through masses. It possesses multiple people at once. It builds armies. Its approach is fundamentally different from Vecna's. So if Vecna was really controlling the Mind Flayer, wouldn't the Mind Flayer act more like Vecna? Wouldn't it focus on targeted psychological torture instead of mass possession? To be honest, I've always thought the Mind Flayer was scarier when it felt like an independent entity, something ancient and alien that humans couldn't really understand. Making it just Vecna's puppet diminishes it a bit. It makes the threat more personal, which is fine, but it also makes it smaller. The Mind Flayer in Season 2 felt cosmic, like something vast and incomprehensible. Vecna feels human even with all his power. He has human motivations, human anger, human trauma. The Mind Flayer doesn't feel human at all, and that difference matters. So the theory is that the Mind Flayer is its own entity, possibly ancient, possibly something that existed in the Upside Down long before Vecna arrived. When Vecna was banished there, the Mind Flayer didn't destroy him. It let him live. It let him think he was shaping the dimension and controlling the creatures. But really, the Mind Flayer was just using Vecna as a tool. A particularly powerful tool, but a tool nonetheless. Vecna's connection to 11 makes him useful. He can lure her in, make her open gates, weaken the barriers. And once the gates are open, the Mind Flayer can do what it's always wanted to do. Spread beyond the Upside Down and consume our world. This would mean that even if our heroes defeat Vecna, the Mind Flayer remains. And that's a pretty terrifying thought, because Vecna can be killed. He's mortal, sort of, but the Mind Flayer is everywhere. It's the Upside Down itself in a way. How do you kill an entire dimension? There's also Will's connection to consider. Will was possessed by the Mind Flayer in Season 2, and even after being exorcised, he retained a connection to it. He can sense when it's near. He can feel its emotions, if you can call them emotions. And Will has never been connected to Vecna. He didn't even know Vecna existed until Season 4. So if Vecna was really controlling the Mind Flayer, wouldn't Will be connected to Vecna too? But he's not. He's connected specifically to the Mind Flayer. Which suggests the Mind Flayer is its own thing, not just Vecna's puppet. Whether Vecna is controlling the Mind Flayer or the other way around, one thing's pretty clear. Season 5 is setting up a confrontation with something massive, and that's where the time loop theories start to get really wild. Now let's talk about one of the most mind-bending theories floating around. What if Hawkins is stuck in a loop? This theory is based on that November 6, 1983 detail we talked about earlier. The Upside Down is frozen on that date. Nothing has changed since then. And that's weird, right? If the upside down is just a parallel dimension, why would time stop? But if there's a time loop involved, suddenly it makes more sense. The loop keeps resetting to that date. Every cycle brings us back to the moment the gate opened. And everything that happens in the show is part of that loop, playing out over and over. The bootstrap paradox is a time travel concept where an event or object exists without origin. It's a loop with no beginning, and some fans think Stranger Things might be employing that paradox. What if 11 opening the gate in 1983 was caused by future events? What if something that happens in Season 5 is what causes the gate to open in Season 1, creating a causal loop where the effect precedes the cause? I mean, think about it. 11. Touching the Demogorgon in Season 1 seems like a random accident. She's spying on a Russian agent, and suddenly there's this monster in the void. But what if that monster was there specifically to lure her? What if someone or something from the future sent the Demogorgon to that exact moment? Knowing 11 would touch it and open the gate, that would mean the entire series has been orchestrated by someone manipulating time. And there's loads of clock symbolism throughout the show. Vecna's victims all see a grandfather clock before they die. The clock chimes 4 times, representing the 4 kills he needs. But clocks are also symbols of time itself. They measure it, mark its passage. And a grandfather clock specifically is an old mechanical device. It ticks backward and forward. What if the clock isn't just Vecna's calling card? What if it's a hint about the time loop? There are also references throughout the show to turning back time, to fixing mistakes, to getting second chances. 11 brings Max back from death, reversing her fate. Hopper survives what should have been a fatal explosion. Characters escape death repeatedly, and every time they do, it feels like time is being bent or broken in some way. The frozen date in the Upside Down is the biggest clue. November 6th, 1983. That's the day Will disappeared. The day everything started. And if time is looping, that date would be the anchor point. The moment the loop begins or resets, every cycle brings them back to that moment. And maybe the only way to break the loop is to change what happens on November 6th. To prevent the gate from opening in the first place. Or to accept that the gate opens and find a different way to respond. 11's powers might be the key to this. She can move things with her mind, open gates to other dimensions. But what if she can also affect time? It's never been explicitly stated, but some of what she does feels time adjacent. She brought Max back from death. She found Hopper across the world through some kind of psychic connection. She exists partially in the void, this black space where normal rules don't apply. Maybe the void is outside of time, and maybe 11 can use it to move through time, consciously or unconsciously. Imagine if 11, in trying to close the gates and defeat Vecna, accidentally creates the time loop. She goes back to stop the gate from opening, but her interference is what causes it to open. The loop has no beginning. She creates the problem she's trying to solve, and the only way to break the loop is to stop trying to fix it, to let events play out differently, to accept loss instead of fighting against it. This is pretty wild, and I'll admit I'm not entirely sure I fully understand how this would work from a story perspective. Time loops are tricky. They can feel clever, or they can feel like a cop-out, depending on how they're executed. If done well, a time loop could explain so many of the weird coincidences and patterns in the show. Why the same themes keep repeating. Why certain characters survive impossible situations. Why the upside down feels inevitable. But if done poorly, it could feel like the writers are just hitting a reset button to avoid consequences. There's also the question of whether the characters would be aware of the loop. Do they remember previous cycles, or does each loop feel like the first time to them? If they do remember, that would be absolutely traumatic. Imagine living through these horrors over and over, knowing you've failed before, trying desperately to do something different this time. If they don't remember, then breaking the loop would require them to somehow figure out they're in one, which feels nearly impossible. The Duffer Brothers have cited a bunch of time loop stories as influences. Groundhog Day, obviously, but also more sci-fi oriented time travel stories. They love playing with narrative structure. And a time loop would be the ultimate narrative trick. It would recontextualize everything we've watched. Every episode, every season would take on new meaning if it's all part of a repeating cycle. But honestly, I guess we'll have to wait and see. The time loop theory is one of those things that either makes perfect sense when revealed or seems absurd in hindsight. There's enough evidence to make it plausible, but not enough to make it certain. And that's kind of where we are with most of these theories. We have pieces, but not the full picture. If there is a time loop, breaking it would require understanding not just when it started, but why Hawkins in the first place. And that brings us to one of the oldest mysteries. What's actually beneath Hawkins, and why has it always been cursed? Since we're on the topic of why Hawkins is so special, it's worth looking at the town's history before any of our characters were even born. Because Hawkins has always been weird. Long before the lab, long before 11, there were strange occurrences, unexplained deaths, disappearances, stories about the woods being haunted. And the Creel House massacre in 1959 is just the most documented example of something that's probably been happening for much longer. Victor Creel's story is really tragic when you think about it. He moved his family to Hawkins for a fresh start, bought this beautiful house, and then within months, his wife and daughter were dead. He was blamed for their murders, declared insane, locked up in a psychiatric hospital for decades. But he didn't kill them. His son Henry did. And Henry didn't just snap one day. He'd been killing animals, experimenting with his powers, building up to murdering his family. The question is why? What was it about that house, that location, that brought out the darkness in Henry? The theory is that Hawkins sits on cursed land. Maybe it's an old Native American burial ground, which, is a total horror trope, but it's plausible in universe. Lots of American horror stories use that concept, because there's historical precedent for places being considered sacred or forbidden by indigenous peoples. And if Hawkins was built on top of something like that, it would explain the persistent bad vibes. The land itself is wrong, and people who are sensitive to that wrongness, people like Henry Creel, would be affected more strongly. There's also the question of why Hawkins' lab was built there specifically. The official story is that it was studying psychic phenomena and conducting experiments on children with powers. But labs like that could be anywhere. Why a small town in Indiana? Unless the government knew something about Hawkins already. Unless there were reports of strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, things that suggested the area was special. Maybe the lab wasn't just studying psychic kids. Maybe it was studying the location, trying to understand why Hawkins was a hotspot for weirdness. It's worth noting that the real-world context for Stranger Things is the 1980s Satanic Panic. This was a period where people genuinely believed that satanic cults were operating across America, kidnapping children, performing rituals, spreading evil. Most of it was mass hysteria, fueled by sensational media coverage, and a few high-profile cases that turned out to be false. But the panic was real. People were scared. And in the show, that fear is reflected in how the town reacts to the murders and disappearances. They blame Eddie and his Hellfire Club. They think D&D is opening portals to hell. They form vigilante mobs. The satanic panic is used as a smokescreen for the actual supernatural events happening. But what if there's a kernel of truth to the idea that Hawkins is cursed? Not in a satanic way, but in a genuinely supernatural way. What if there is something beneath the town? Not a demon, but something older. Something that predates human civilization. Maybe the Upside Down isn't just a parallel dimension. Maybe it's always been connected to Hawkins specifically, because there's a weak point in reality there. A crack in the fabric of the universe that's been there for thousands of years. And the gate opening in 1983 wasn't the first time. It's just the first time in modern history that humans noticed. The Duffer Brothers have cited Lovecraftian horror as an influence, and Lovecraft's stories often featured ancient, incomprehensible entities buried beneath the earth, or existing in dimensions beyond human understanding. The idea of cosmic horror is that humans are insignificant, and there are forces in the universe that don't care about us, that would destroy us without even noticing. The Mind Flayer fits that mold pretty well. It's not evil in a human sense. It's just doing what it does, spreading, consuming, growing. And if there's something beneath Hawkins that's been calling to these cosmic forces, that would explain why the town is such a nexus for supernatural activity. There's also the possibility that someone in Hawkins' past tried to open a gate before. Maybe centuries ago, someone dabbled in magic or rituals or something that connected them to the upside down. And even though they failed or died or were stopped, the connection lingered. The scar on reality remained, and every generation since then has been affected by it in small ways. Madness, violence, disappearances. Until finally in the 1980s, technology and psychic powers combined to actually tear the barrier open. What loads of people forget is that the show has always had this undercurrent of things being wrong in Hawkins, even before the supernatural stuff starts. The town feels off. There's a darkness beneath the surface, and whether that's just atmospheric storytelling or actual foreshadowing, it contributes to the sense that Hawkins was always doomed. The gate opening was inevitable. 11 didn't cause it so much as trigger something that was waiting to happen. Sort of like how, in real life, some places just feel haunted. There are towns and buildings with reputations for being unlucky or cursed. And sometimes there are rational explanations. Geological factors, historical trauma, economic decline. But sometimes there isn't a clear reason. The place is just wrong. And Hawkins is one of those places. Whether Hawkins has always been cursed or just got really unlucky, one thing's certain. The Duffer Brothers have been leaving breadcrumbs since day one. And speaking of breadcrumbs, let's talk about all the clues, hints, and Easter eggs that might tell us exactly how this ends. If you really fancy seeing what clues we've already got, the Duffer Brothers have actually been pretty generous with hints, though they're also masters of misdirection, so you can never be entirely sure what's a clue and what's a red herring. But they have confirmed a few things in interviews over the years, and those confirmations are worth examining. First, they've said that Season 5 will go back to the show's Season 1 roots. It's going to feel like the early days of Stranger Things, focusing on the core group of kids, the mystery and horror elements, the small-town atmosphere. Seasons 3 and 4 expanded the scope massively, taking characters to Russia and California, introducing tons of new characters, making everything bigger and more action-oriented. Season 5 is apparently going to scale back, return to Hawkins, and tell a more intimate story, which suggests that the final battle isn't going to be a massive CGI spectacle. It's going to be personal. Second, they've confirmed that the series was always planned as 4 to 5 seasons. They knew the endpoint from the beginning. The story arc was mapped out, which means they've been planting seeds for the ending since Season 1. Things that seemed like throwaway lines or minor details might actually be crucial. So it's worth going back and rewatching early episodes with that in mind. What moments in Season 1 feel unresolved? What mysteries were never fully explained? Those are probably going to come back. Third, the Duffer Brothers have been very open about their influences. Stephen King, Steven Spielberg, John Carpenter, Ridley Scott. They've named all these creators and their works as inspirations for Stranger Things. And one of the most frequently cited influences is Stephen King's IT, both the novel and the adaptations. It is about a group of kids fighting an ancient evil that awakens every 27 years to feed on fear. The story involves childhood trauma, the power of belief, and the idea that sometimes you have to return as adults to finish what you started as kids. Sound familiar? Stranger Things follows a very similar structure. The evil awakens, the kids fight it, and in IT, they have to come back as adults to finish the job. Stranger Things is compressing that timeline, but the parallels are clear. Another king influence is The Mist, which has one of the bleakest endings in horror. Without spoiling it too much, The Mist ends with a devastating, ironic tragedy where the protagonist makes a terrible decision that turns out to be completely wrong. The Duffer Brothers have mentioned The Mist specifically when talking about how endings don't always have to be happy, so maybe don't expect everyone to survive Season 5 and ride off into the sunset. There's going to be loss, there's going to be regret. As for Easter eggs from Season 1, there are loads that haven't paid off yet. The whole thing with Will being able to communicate through lights, for example. He used Christmas lights to spell out messages from the upside down. That specific method of communication hasn't really come back since Season 1. Maybe it will in Season 5. Maybe Will uses lights again to send a message or signal something. There's also the whole Castle Byers thing. Will built this little fort in the woods as a kid, his safe place, and it appears in the upside down. The fort gets destroyed in Season 3 as part of Will's arc about growing up and moving on from his childhood. But what if Castle Byers comes back in Season 5? What if that location, that memory, becomes important again? Then there's the Dungeons and Dragons campaign from the very first episode. The kids are playing a campaign where they're fighting a Demogorgon, and they lose. Mike's character is killed or defeated, the details are fuzzy, but the point is they don't win. And that campaign was basically a preview of Season 1. A Demogorgon appears, they fight it, and things don't go as planned. But in the actual season, they do win. They save Will, they defeat the Demogorgon. So the D&D game was foreshadowing, but also misdirection. Now what if Season 5 has another D&D game? And what if that game previews the ending? The Duffer Brothers love using D&D as a narrative frame. It would make sense for the final season to bookend with a campaign that mirrors the final battle. According to the Duffer Brothers in various interviews, they've promised that character arcs will be completed. Everyone who's been part of the journey will get resolution, which is reassuring but also ominous, because sometimes resolution means death. Sometimes completing an arc means a character achieves their goal and then doesn't survive to enjoy it. So we'll get closure, but closure isn't the same as happiness. They've also confirmed that they refuse to answer certain questions, specifically questions about the Upside Down's true nature, about Eleven's ultimate fate, and about whether there's anything bigger than the Mind Flayer. The fact that they won't answer those questions is probably the real clue. If the answers were straightforward, they could just say so, but they're keeping tight-lipped, which suggests those are the big reveals. The answers to those questions are what Season 5 is building toward. What's really interesting is how much the fandom has correctly predicted over the years. People guessed that 11 opened the gate before that was confirmed. People theorized about a bigger threat in the Upside Down before Vecna was revealed. The Duffer Brothers clearly read fan theories and sometimes incorporate them or subvert them. So on one hand, the fact that loads of fans have similar theories about Season 5 suggests those theories might be right. But on the other hand, the Duffers know what we're expecting, and they might deliberately go in a different direction. They're proper cryptic about it, which is part of the fun, honestly. The speculation and anticipation are half the experience. There's also the possibility that the Duffers are being honest and the ending is exactly what it looks like. Sometimes the most obvious answer is the right one. Vecna is the big bad. Our heroes defeat him, close the gates, save Hawkins, and move on with their lives. Some people die, some people survive, and it's bittersweet, but ultimately hopeful. That's a satisfying ending. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. But knowing the Duffers, there's probably at least one big twist we're not seeing coming. But perhaps the biggest clue about how Season 5 will end comes from looking at how Season 1 began. Because if the Duffers are serious about coming full circle, then we need to examine what actually happened that first night Will Byers vanished. Now you can't talk about Stranger Things ending without diving into where it all started, and there are still questions about that first episode that have never been fully answered. The night of November 6, 1983, Will Byers was riding his bike home from Mike's house after a D&D session. He's alone on a dark road through the woods, and then the lights start flickering. His bike light goes out, and something appears behind him. A monster, the Demogorgon. Will pedals faster, crashes his bike, runs to his house, and when the creature gets inside, Will runs to the shed and tries to load his dad's gun. But before he can, he vanishes. Taken into the Upside Down. Here's the question that's always bothered people. Why did the Demogorgon specifically take Will and not kill him immediately? Barb was killed within hours of being taken. Other victims died on contact, but Will survived a week. He hid, he evaded the creature, and he stayed alive long enough to be rescued. How? And more importantly, why was he taken in the first place? The Demogorgon could have killed him in the shed. It had him cornered. But instead, it dragged him through a gate into the Upside Down. That's a choice. The creature chose to take Will alive, which suggests Will was valuable for some reason. One theory is that Will was chosen because of his sensitivity. He's creative, empathetic, emotionally open. Maybe those qualities made him compatible with the Upside Down's hive mind. The Mind Flayer later possesses him because he's the right kind of victim. His mind is accessible. And maybe the Demogorgon sensed that. It didn't take him to kill him. It took him to prepare him for possession, to make him part of the Upside Down. Another theory is that Will's survival wasn't luck. It was intentional. Someone or something wanted Will alive. Maybe Vecna, who was already in the Upside Down, recognized that Will was connected to 11 somehow. They didn't know each other yet, but they're both sensitive kids with trauma. 11 would come looking for Will. She'd use her powers to find him, and that would keep the gate open longer, giving Vecna more opportunities to influence events. Will was bait. There's also the Castle Byers connection. In the Upside Down, Will hides in Castle Byers, the little fort he built. It exists in the Upside Down because the Upside Down is a mirror of Hawkins. But the fort is also symbolic. It represents Will's childhood, his innocence, his imagination, and he uses that safe space to survive. He sings the Clash song his mum loves. He communicates through the lights. He holds on to his memories of home. And maybe that's why he survived when others didn't. He refused to give up. He stayed himself. And the Upside Down couldn't fully consume him because of that. In Season 2, after Will is rescued, he starts having these episodes. Now memories. He's standing in his yard, and suddenly he's in the Upside Down. The two dimensions overlap in his perception, and the Mind Flayer is there, watching him. Eventually, it possesses him completely. Will becomes the spy, and there's this moment where Joyce and Hopper have to essentially exercise him, heating him up until the Mind Flayer is forced to leave his body. And Will says something during that possession. He says he likes it cold. He's referring to the Mind Flayer. It wants cold. It wants to spread like a virus, turning Hawkins into another frozen, dead place, like the Upside Down. That statement, he likes it cold, has always felt significant. It's such a specific detail. And maybe it's foreshadowing. Maybe the final battle in Season 5 involves heat versus cold, fire versus ice, warmth versus the frozen dimension. Maybe the way to destroy the Upside Down is to literally warm it up, to thaw it out, to bring life back to that dead place. And Will, who survived the Upside Down once and was possessed by the Mind Flayer, might be the key to figuring out how to do that. The bike in the woods is another detail worth noting. Will's bike is left behind when he's taken. It's found the next morning, evidence of his disappearance. And in Season 1, the bike becomes a symbol. Mike and the others follow the clues. They retrace Will's route. They piece together what happened. The bike is where it all started. So will the bike come back in Season 5? Will there be a parallel scene where someone finds a bike in the woods again? Where history repeats or comes full circle? I love that the show has always treated Will's disappearance as a mystery, not just a plot device. There are layers to it, unanswered questions, and Season 5 has the opportunity to finally close that loop, to answer everything about that night and why it mattered so much. If Season 5 really does come full circle, then Will's role might be more important than anyone expected. He's been sidelined in recent seasons, but narratively, he's the heart of the story. The first victim, the boy who came back, the one who's still connected to the Upside Down. If anyone's going to be crucial to the ending, it's him. And whether that means he sacrifices himself or becomes the key to saving everyone without dying, either way, Will Byers is central to how this ends. And here are a couple fun theories I found that connect Stranger Things to other stories and real-world events in ways that might actually reveal the ending. The Montauk Project is a conspiracy theory about supposed secret government experiments conducted at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York, during the 1980s. According to the conspiracy, the government was experimenting with time travel, psychological warfare, and contact with extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. It's completely unverified, probably nonsense, but it's a fascinating bit of conspiracy lore. And here's the kicker. Stranger Things was originally titled Montauk. The Duffer Brothers' pitch was explicitly based on the Montauk Project conspiracy. They changed the title and some details, but the core idea remained. Secret government experiments on kids with powers, opening gates to other dimensions, all of it traces back to Montauk. So if the show's origins are rooted in the Montauk conspiracy, maybe the ending will tie back to those ideas too. Time travel, dimensional rifts, government cover-ups. Maybe there's a bigger conspiracy at play that we haven't seen yet. Maybe the government isn't done interfering. Maybe Hawkins' lab being shut down in Season 1 wasn't the end of government involvement. Maybe there are other labs, other experiments, other kids with powers who will show up in Season 5. Then there's MK Ultra, which is not a conspiracy theory, but a confirmed real program. The CIA conducted experiments on unwitting subjects from the 1950s through the 1970s, testing mind control, drugs, torture, psychological manipulation. It was horrific and illegal, and when it was exposed, there was a massive scandal. Stranger Things draws heavily from MK Ultra. Dr. Brenner's experiments on Eleven and the other kids are directly inspired by real CIA programs. And if the show is willing to engage with that dark history, maybe Season 5 will reveal more about the program's scope. Maybe Brenner wasn't the only one. Maybe there are other doctors, other facilities still operating in secret. Stephen King's influence on Stranger Things can't be overstated. The Duffers love King, and specific King novels have clear parallels to the show. IT, as mentioned earlier, is about kids fighting an ancient evil. Carrie is about a girl with telekinetic powers who's abused and lashes out. Firestarter is about a girl who can control fire and is hunted by a secret government agency. The Mist is about a small town trapped by otherworldly creatures. The Shining is about psychic abilities and trauma. All of these King stories have influenced Stranger Things in various ways, and King's endings are often bittersweet or tragic. The heroes win, but at great cost. Sometimes they don't really win at all, so expecting a pure happy ending for Stranger Things probably isn't realistic. It's going to be more complicated than that. There's also the influence of 1980s Spielberg films, particularly E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Both films deal with kids encountering something otherworldly, something that changes them. E.T. is about friendship and loss, and saying goodbye to something you love. Close Encounters is about obsession and the unknown calling to you. Stranger Things blends those ideas. Eleven is both the powerful alien figure like E.T. and the curious human drawn to the unknown, like the characters in Close Encounters. If the show's ending mirrors E.T., then Eleven might have to leave, to go somewhere else, sacrificing her place in the human world to save it. That would be absolutely heartbreaking, but it would fit the bittersweet tone. Apparently, the Duffers have also cited anime, specifically Akira and Elfen Lied as influences. Both of those deal with kids who have devastating psychic powers, and government conspiracies and apocalyptic consequences, and both have pretty dark endings. So yeah, maybe season 5 goes darker than we're expecting. Whether these real-world connections mean anything or are just interesting background, they definitely add another layer to the show's mythology. Stranger Things isn't just a fun sci-fi adventure. It's engaging with real history, real trauma, real fears about what governments do in secret and what power does to people. And that thematic depth suggests the ending will have something to say about those ideas, not just wrap up the plot. So after all these theories about deaths, time loops, ancient evils, and coming full circle, what's the most likely ending? I think the most probable scenario, based on all the evidence we have, is something bittersweet. Our heroes defeat Vecna and close the Upside Down, but not everyone survives. Someone major dies, probably Steve or Will, or possibly even Eleven. The town of Hawkins is forever changed. Maybe parts of it are destroyed. Maybe the government steps in and covers everything up, turning Hawkins into a cautionary tale or a forgotten incident. The kids grow up, move on, but they're never quite the same. They carry the trauma with them. And years later, maybe there's an epilogue showing them as adults, reuniting, remembering what they went through, honouring those they lost. That's the realistic ending, the one that balances narrative satisfaction with emotional weight. It gives the characters victories but makes them pay for those victories. It closes the story but acknowledges that some wounds never fully heal. But there's also the hopeful version. Maybe everyone survives. Maybe the deaths we're expecting don't happen. Maybe the Duffer Brothers subvert expectations by letting the characters win without devastating loss. Eleven keeps her powers, or loses them, but gets to live a normal life. Will finds peace. Steve gets his family. Hopper and Joyce get their happy ending. The town recovers. Life goes on. And the message is that sometimes, against all odds, hope wins, love wins. The good guys actually get to be okay. That would be radical in its own way. A genuinely optimistic ending in a genre that usually demands sacrifice. To be honest, I hope for the hopeful version, but I expect the bittersweet one. The Duffer Brothers have been pretty clear that season 5 won't be all sunshine and rainbows. There will be consequences. But maybe those consequences are less about death and more about change. Maybe the cost is growing up, letting go of childhood, accepting that you can't go back to the way things were. That's a different kind of loss, but it's still meaningful, and it would fit with the show's themes about nostalgia and innocence and how we hold on to the past. Of course, the Duffer Brothers have surprised us before. Maybe all these theories are wrong. Maybe they've got something completely unexpected planned that nobody's guessing. Maybe there's a massive twist that recontextualizes everything. Maybe the ending is weirder, darker, or more hopeful than any of us imagine. I guess we'll find out when the final season drops. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's video. In a future one, I'm definitely going to cover other topics like behind-the-scenes stories, cast interviews, deep dives into specific characters, the music and soundtrack, Easter eggs we missed. Just so much stuff that I didn't have the time to write for this video. But until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.